Chop, the original Guillotine League podcast. Everything you need to know to avoid the chopping block. Chop is brought to you by GuillotineLeagues.com. Now, your host, Paul Charchian.
Welcome to Chop, the Guillotine League podcast. We are here to help you stay alive in the best way to play fantasy football ever invented. It is Guillotine Leagues. I always like to get help for this segment, and my co-host today begin with a man more committed to his projections than possible grandfather and Nobel Prize winner for economics, Milton Freedman. It's Matthew Freedman. Any possible relationship between Milton Freedman and Matthew Freedman? What do you think? Yes? Maybe?
I mean, I don't know how prolific Milton Freedman was in procreating, so you never know. You never know, but I don't think so. I will say, Charch, just classic stuff as the inventor of Guillotine Leagues to say that Guillotine Leagues is the greatest fantasy game ever created. Great stuff there.
Yeah, well, it might actually be true. As far as I'm concerned, it is. And funny how that works when you invent it, you love it. The other co-host today, a man who's breaking his JJ McCarthy bereavement in order to join the Chop podcast. It's Thor Nystrom, clad in black. Of course you are, Thor. JJ down, breaking your Shiva just for us. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I'm not starting wearing colors again until JJ gets back on the field, but it's an honor to break my bereavement to join you boys today.
I love it. Fantastic. It is a flex around and find out Thursday. Thor, tell people what they're going to get today with today's show as we flex around and find out.
The only guys that fantasy owners need to be, you're looking at guys that otherwise would be startable, that we're making an argument. Maybe this guy that other people tell you should be in your starting lineup. Maybe you should think twice about it, especially if you have a decent option on the bench. So we're going to make an argument against 9 guys that are otherwise seen as startable this week.
Absolutely. These are flex level guys, especially with 15 teams left in most Guillotine leagues. They're obvious players you're going to start even in the face of tough matchups. We're going to give you some of those fringe guys that you may not want to start today on Flex Around and Find Out. But first, let's dial back just one short month ago. It's the end of August. Guillotine drafts were taking place. The first picks in Guillotine leagues at the time were Jamar Chase, Bijan Robinson, and Saquon Barkley. Now, those haven't been bad picks, but also they haven't quite lived up to their draft expectation either. In the case, Barkley has shown up in our top 10 most chopped players before. So let's talk now. If you are restarting a Guillotine League from scratch right now, which you can do at GuillotineLeagues.com, you can start anytime you want with any number of teams that you want. Who would be your first 3 players? Let's start with Freedman. If you were redrafting a Guillotine League now, who would you recommend at 1, 2, and 3?
So it's funny because I do this exercise every Sunday and Monday because I do the rest of season Guillotine League ranked. So I think about this, right? And
all the time, yes.
I would say we've also got the utilization report, which is a great way of helping to think through this because the guys who are getting a lot of usage, whether or not they're necessarily scoring some of those fantasy points, you can see, all right, this is someone moving forward. If this usage is sticky, who is likely to do well moving forward. So I think Bijan Robinson is still in the top 3 for me. Puka Nacua, who has been just an absolute rock star to this point. I think he's the wide receiver 1. And then I would make the case for Christian McCaffrey, who has also been a utilization superstar to this point in the season. To me, he's not quite as dynamic, but he's still Christian McCaffrey, and he's still getting Christian McCaffrey-like usage. I think he still deserves to be in the top 3 because whenever McCaffrey is healthy, and he's healthy right now, he's been a top 3 fantasy asset.
Here's where I'm struggling with Christian McCaffrey, and Thor, I'll be interested to hear if you agree with this. The probability of him playing 17 games is low, and somebody else has already worked out gotten 3 weeks out of him. Do I want to come in week 4, week 5, week 6 with Christian McCaffrey and hope that he stays upright if your fundamental belief is that he's going to get hurt eventually, sooner than later, and do I want to jump in week 4? Somebody else already got the best 3 games out of his season, in theory, the healthiest 3 games out of his season. Do I want to come in now? Would you take Thor, Christian McCaffrey, with one of the top 3 picks?
He was number 2 on my list, Mr. Christian McCaffrey. There's questions with some of the other guys at the top of the board, right? So, I mean, the question you just brought up about McCaffrey is valid. Valid last couple of years when we talk about Christian McCaffrey, but we have other questions with some of the other top guys. Freedman was talking about receivers, and I do Puka Nacua is also in my top 3, but for instance, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson working with backup quarterbacks right now, etc.
Yep.
I would have McCaffrey in my top 3. I had him number 2. My number 1 guy, same guy that I had in the preseason. I would still take Bijan Robinson number 1 if I had the first pick in a redraft Guillotine League, the starter right now. And like I said, number 3, Puka. Going back to what Freedman said, I don't know how you could make the argument for someone else right in this moment if you had a draft that was starting right now than Puka.
All right, and Puka would be my number 1 choice. All right, let me give you 2 other names that have not come up yet. I think Bijan's is absolutely in this conversation. Let me give you 2 more. Is Jonathan Taylor in this conversation? He's getting a heavy workload. Colts are obviously way better than people expected. Offensive line's been really good. Taylor's catching some. The only reason Taylor hasn't been even more heroic is the Colts have happened to have 3 goal-to-go opportunities from the 1 in which Daniel Jones has snuck the ball in from the 1. Any other scenario, if they were at the 2 or the 3 or the 4 yard line, those would be Jonathan Taylor touchdowns too. Is Jonathan Taylor in this conversation for top 3 for you guys?
Go ahead,
that's
Freeman.
Fair. I think that's fair. I have him right now in the Guillotine League rest of season ranks. I have him at number 10, but he's at the RB4 spot. And really, I see him as really right there with Saquon. He's got the pass catching capability that I think is underappreciated, but I still think he's a pretty good pass catcher. And then the usage is just unreal. I mean, he's playing like 90% of the snaps.
Yes.
There are some games where the other running backs are touching the ball once or twice. He is the backfield, and the offense is running through the backfield. Part of the question, I think, I don't know if I would say I have injury concerns with him, but just the injury concerns that you mentioned with Christian McCaffrey, I think those apply to all of the running backs. And I prefer McCaffrey just a little bit more because of what he can do as a pass catcher. But certainly I think a case can be made for Jonathan Taylor.
All right, I'm going to give you one more name that nobody's mentioned that I think should be in the conversation right now for a top 3 pick. Trey McBride. Everybody's scrambling to come up with a tight end, right? There's about 5 you can trust. There's 15 teams in the league. People are dying at the tight end position, and here's Trey McBride. Now, we're recording this Thursday afternoon. We don't know what's going to happen Thursday night. McBride has been good, not overwhelming, but he's been good. But he would be the top tight end choice. I can square away my tight end and not sweat it for the rest of the season with Trey McBride here. Are you guys listening to this very Guillotine-specific answer to who you could draft at the top of a Guillotine League redraft?
For me, I wouldn't have McBride top 3, but certainly in consideration for the first round. And to your point about Jonathan Taylor, recall the last time Daniel Jones had a good season and who his running back was that year. We're turning back the clock with Daniel Jones and the high running back usage there next to him. Obviously going to turn into some fantasy value there too. But yeah, McBride, he's going to be strong the rest of the year. I wouldn't take him with the top 3 though.
The McBride, I gotta say, it is so spicy. Charch, what I love about you as an analyst and kind of thinking about stacking players is that it's very much no risk it, no biscuit. You know what I mean? Like it is a risk seeking, it's volatile to go with Trey McBride, but it's you know what? I'm going to do this strategy and let's see if it works. And if it works, then I win my league. If it works, then it maximizes everything else I can do. So I wouldn't do it, but I admire the boldness of the
willing to be so stupid that you would talk about taking Trey McBride in the top 3 picks. I just, to me, having done a lot of Guillotine leagues, there's nothing worse than just trying to shuffle through tight ends and trying to make that work. And you're trying to pick spot starters, having to overpay a tight end over and over again. Oh, the worst. The worst. I like Trey McBride in the top 3. All right. Let's get into Flex Around and find out. It's brought to you by Xfinity, including the 5-year price guarantee. One consistent internet price for the next 5 years, guaranteed with Xfinity. All right, let's begin with Freedman. Your first Flex Around and find out player is who?
All right, I'm looking at Isaiah Pacheco. The Chiefs are hosting the Ravens. The Ravens are, on short rest coming off of Monday Night Football. And, primetime, you could have watched that game where the Ravens were hosting the Lions, and the Ravens just got pushed around all over the defensive line. The Lions just absolutely took it to the Ravens and out-physicaled them on the ground, which is something you don't typically see with this Ravens defense. But, man, they looked bad. And then you kind of look at the injury report, and, oh, man, Nnamdi Madubuike was out. Travis Jones and Broderick Washington, the other 2 defensive tackles who start there, they are now on the injury report. Kyle Van Noy, the edge rusher, was out last week. I'm kind of skeptical he plays this week. So the defensive line is all sorts of beat up for the Ravens, who are number 29 in both defensive rush, EPA, and success rate. So you can just kind of look at these things and say, yeah, I can see why someone would specifically want to attack this defense. And of course, dogs. It's not something we see that often with the Chiefs, but they are underdogs. But also Patrick Mahomes as an underdog is 12-3-1 against the spread for his career. It's actually this is a spot in which the Chiefs tend to overperform. So I'd say objectively, if you are someone who has Pacheco on your team, you're looking at this spot and thinking all right, one more time, one more opportunity I'm giving to Isaiah Pacheco, right? But he just no longer, you just look at him, he no longer looks like a good player. 105 yards with no touchdowns in 3 games. He's in an almost even timeshare with Kareem Hunt, who honestly looks like a worse player, but he can't outplay Kareem Hunt, and he doesn't get a lot of usage as a receiver. And the Chiefs offense isn't as explosive anymore. So he doesn't have that enhanced shot of getting multiple touchdowns, that opportunity of multiple scores that he had previously when the Chiefs were the Chiefs. So, and then plus I'll just say the Ravens defense, it can't be this bad, or it can't be this bad extended into the season. At some point they're going to get right. Maybe that happens against a Chiefs team that just can't seem to be able to run the ball. So I look at Pacheco and I can see the bull case for him, but the bear case just seems so massive. It feels like another game with no touchdowns and 35 yards is what we have coming from Isaiah Pacheco. And that is certainly bad enough to get you chopped.
We talked about this on our sister podcast, Fantasy Football Weekly. We talked about Pacheco last week on last Friday's show. I urge people to just drop him outright because the temptation to start him is still there, and all he's going to do is bury your team. Yeah, Pacheco has looked objectively awful, and that screen pass last week is the kind of stuff that gets you benched. That's doghouse material for Andy Reid, and I have a lot of worry that Pacheco is going to lose a ton of reps. And at this point, the drumbeat is starting to sound for the Chiefs to potentially make a trade to find running back help. A lot of people think the answer to that will be Alvin Kamara as a possibility. And I think that does make some sense, as a matter of fact. All right, Thor, let's go to your flex around and find out player. You're going at the quarterback position today.
Yeah, we'll start with the quarterbacks. Dak Prescott against the Packers. Dak leads the league in dropbacks. He has a league high in passing attempts, 4th most passing yards in the NFL, but only 4 touchdown passes. That ranks 20th. And of course, he's going to be without CeeDee Lamb on Sunday night against an elite defense. The Packers have allowed the second fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks so far this season. We all know about that. And we know that rushing output is not going to save Dak. Only 4 rushing attempts this season. Now, this one's a little bit more conventional, and I went back and forth. Do I want to go the spicier guy? Do it, Dak's a little bit easier. I'm going to toss out a second one. So now we're going to give you 10 guys to potentially fade here. Spicier one, Jared Goff against the Browns. I would advocate for people to keep Jared Goff on the bench this week as well. This is a sneaky bad matchup, or maybe even an overtly bad matchup. If you watched last week's game between the Browns and the Packers, the Browns want to turn every game into a rock fight this season. They were successful last week, of course. Cleveland's defense not only held Jordan Love beneath 14 fantasy points, they also did it to Joe Burrow in the opener. Goff has scored fewer than 15 fantasy points in each of his road games against the Packers and the Ravens. I think the Browns are going to hold Jared Goff to less than 15 fantasy points as well. So maybe look at another quarterback there as well if you have Goff rostered.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm going to stay on that theme and go to David Montgomery. This one is painful. Montgomery just ran through the Ravens and looked amazing. How can you not start him after that performance? But this is the toughest matchup of his year in all probability. And we know that when David Montgomery doesn't score, from time to time, he has dud games and where he doesn't get a lot of usage, doesn't catch a lot of passes, doesn't get the touchdown. And it could be shaping up this week this way. Let's talk about Cleveland. In 3 weeks, 3 straight weeks, Cleveland has faced running backs taken in the first 2 rounds of fantasy drafts. Chase Brown in week 1, then Derrick Henry, and then Josh Jacobs. Those are dominating workhorse backs, unlike Montgomery, who shares time. Brown, Henry, and Jacobs finished their weeks as running back 21, running back 57, and running back 23. And none of them topped 43 rushing yards. Brown and Henry didn't catch anything. They combined for 8 receiving yards here. Cleveland ranks number 1 in run stuff win rate. They rank number 2 in Pro Football Focus's run defense rankings. It is a brutal matchup for David Montgomery. And I know, based on everything we saw last week, it's almost impossible to bench him. But what do you think, guys? It's not like you've got deep rosters yet in Guillotine Leagues, but would you dare to start David Montgomery here?
I like that call, Charge. Cleveland's run defense been lights out, right? Yep. And to your point, when you can withhold Montgomery, keep him out of the end zone, you find yourself susceptible to a dud matchup. And in Guillotine Leagues this early in the season, we're especially scared of those because you don't want to get cut this early in the season. So just risk aversion. If you have another startable guy on your team, that's certainly one to look into.
Yeah, Freedman, I will say. Yeah, I'll say, with the idea of Goff and Montgomery and really that whole Lions offense, they are going against a buzzsaw of a defense. I mean, like Myles Garrett, I know like people talk about like Micah Parsons as the best edge rusher in the league, but I mean, really like Myles Garrett is holding that defense, which like, I don't want to say it's a no-name defense, but like he's the guy. And then they have some other good players, but he elevates the entire defense. And then specifically with defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, since he's been there, he joined the team in 2023. Since he came there and sort of like unlocked that defense a little bit, like with his aggressive scheme, they've been the number 1 defense in the league, number 1 in defensive success rate, like by far. It's like 2 percentage points above the Jets, who are number 2 over that time period. Number 1 in drop back EPA and drop back success rate. Like it's almost impossible to get something going against this team when they are healthy, like when they're fully healthy. And right now on defense, they're healthy. And so I would say, Montgomery, to echo Thor's point, if he doesn't fall into the end zone, that's what you're hoping for. That's what you're
That is our best case scenario. That's right.
But if he doesn't fall into the end zone, he could have like 25 yards with one reception. And then it's like, well, I'm cut, like the Browns did it again. So I don't think you can start any of those players on the Lions with confidence. I mean, like there's some guys you have to start, like you have to start Amon-Ra St. Brown. If you have Jameson Williams, you probably have to start him, but he's so volatile though, that like you could easily get 20 yards and nothing else from him. So it is just such a dangerous matchup for this team that if I could avoid the Lions skill position players altogether, like I would prefer to do it.
Yeah, this is part of what makes Guillotine Leagues so unique is these kinds of scenarios that you just don't have to sweat in the same way when the downside is just adding one more L in the loss column as opposed to your season ending. I'm glad you mentioned Jameson Williams. I thought he might come up between one of us here in this game. He will not come up, But Freedman, you've got another receiver that you're fading. This guy through 3 games is wide receiver 60 in fantasy points scored, despite going in the 2nd or 3rd round of Guillotine drafts.
Yeah. Looking at T. Higgins, playing on the road at Denver. So a tough place to play and obviously a tough secondary to go against. The Bengals looked terrible last week with Jake Browning instead of Joe Burrow. He had just 140 yards passing. That's obviously not enough production to go around to all of the pass catchers in that offense. And Browning has played just a little over 1.5 games this year, and he has an NFL high 5 interceptions in that time.
Yes.
It's just so bad. Like, the Bengals look totally lost on offense, and that's going to impact the number 2 wide receiver way more than the number 1 wide receiver. If you just kind of look at correlations, like when an offense is humming, it's because maybe it's not because the number 2 wide receiver is going off, but it means that the number 2 wide receiver is getting his production. When an offense kind of sucks, the number 1 wide receiver isn't impacted nearly as much as the number 2 wide receiver. And so, you kind of see that in the way that we're projecting and ranking Jamar Chase. Obviously it's a downgrade for him, but we would still have him as a top 12 wide receiver. He's going to get his opportunities, but man, the number 2 wide receiver, and that's T. Higgins in this case, he is just almost forgotten. And you look at what he has done this season, just 104 yards and 1 touchdown. And that a lot of that is just because of one game. In week 2, he had 8 targets. He had 3 receptions, 56 yards, 1 touchdown. That's fine. That's not great, but it's fine. The touchdown saved the day. But the other 2 weeks, weeks 1 and 3, he has 6 targets combined in those 2 weeks, just 48 yards in those 2 games. Like, the downside for Higgins is real, and I would say it's obvious. And Charch, it makes me think of something that you talked about last week, strategically dropping a guy so that someone else picks him up. And I'm looking in a Guillotine League that I'm in right now, and T. Higgins is on the waiver wire, and no one's going for him. No one's biting.
Crazy.
Like I think he's droppable if you need, because what we've seen so far out of this Bengals offense is really bad. And Joe Burrow is not coming back until maybe the very end of the season, which makes me think there's a decent chance he's not coming back at all.
Yeah, Freedman, we call that the sabotage drop, where you drop a guy, somebody else siphons off funds, and they start T. Higgins in this bad scenario. And Packers coming up in 2 weeks. Packers. So you've got 2 of the next 3 games. T. Higgins is not startable, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Thor. Well, and by the way, offensive line, Cincinnati ranks 32nd in ESPN's pass block win rate. The offensive line is so bad for the Bengals. And I want to go to another bad offensive line, Thor. That's the Houston Texans offensive line. Talk to me about Nick Chubb and your concerns for him this week.
Yeah, I'm fading Nick Chubb in a matchup where on the surface it's like, oh, could this be the turn back the clock? And we see a classic Nick Chubb here going up against the Tennessee Titans. Chubb right now, he's RB30 in fantasy. But in this matchup, you have the Texans, they're -7 against the Titans. And despite the appearances that this could be a get right game for the Texans offense and for Chubb in particular, I have some concerns. And my biggest one is last week you saw that Woody Marks, the rookie for the Texans, got up to a season high 49.2% of the snaps in the backfield for Houston. Why would he not jump over that this week and set another new career high for snaps in this game? Why would you not, if you're the Texans, try to get your rookie work in a game that you're going to probably win either way, that the market would suggest you're going to win either way? But with Chubb here, you also have a game where the game total is under 40, by the way. So you have this projected game, lower scoring game that the home team is supposed to win here. I think the Texans are going to get Woody Marks a lot of work here. The Texans need Woody Marks down the stretch here, and they need to see what they have in Woody Marks. This is a great opportunity for him to get more run. I think that's what's going to happen in this game, in what I expect to be a low scoring game.
Nick Chubb, that offensive line is going to create a lot of problems, I believe. And, Nick Chubb's still lead back. I think Nick Chubb's looked okay, but that offensive line and the totality of the Houston offense is a big concern here. And as you mentioned, Woody Marks I picked up Woody Marks in several Guillotine Leagues this week on the idea that he could be the new Austin Eckler for this team.
Yeah.
Third down, receiving back. Chubb doesn't catch very much or very well. So I think that does make some sense. My second flex around and find out player is Washington running back Jacory Krosky-Merritt as he goes up against the Falcons. He's got a knee thing, but everybody expects him to play. Coaches have said he's going to play. I'm avoiding this entire Washington backfield for now, and I mention Jacory Krosky-Merritt specifically because he's the most tempting one to start out of this group, even though it seems like the coaching staff likes Chris Rodriguez the best. Let's talk it through. Last week, Krosky-Merritt and Chris Rodriguez tied for snaps, but Rodriguez led in rushes. It was Jeremy McNichols that broke the long touchdown run, but he only had 4 carries. And by the way, had that been Krosky-Merritt running and doing the exact same run, everybody would be like, oh, God, Krosky-Merritt's so good. But it was Jeremy McNichols instead. Last week, the 3 Washington runners only had 1 target between them from Marcus Mariota. And maybe that will change if Jaden Daniels comes back at the time of this taping. We don't know for sure. Krosky-Merritt has just 1 catch on the year. And, any running back who never catches, even Derrick Henry, ends up giving you guillotine league downside. That is a huge factor because the floor gets real low when you don't get 2 and 3 receptions, 3 or 4 receptions. You don't get those 7 or 8 PPR points. Jacory Krosky-Merritt's not going to help us there. Then there's the Falcons. For everything that went bad for the Falcons last week, they've looked very inconsistent. They've been a pretty good run defense. They're 9th best in fantasy points allowed. They're giving up just 3.5 yards per carry. And far better runners than Jacory Krosky-Merritt have failed utterly against the Falcons. Bucky Irving, 37 rushing yards. Jordan Mason, 30 rushing yards. To me, those are better runners than Jacory Krosky-Merritt, and they have gone belly up. Freedman, what do you think? Jacory Krosky-Merritt, flex around and find out.
Yeah, it's pretty dangerous. I'm looking at the projections that we have right now at Fantasy Life, and man, it's an even timeshare really between Jacory Krosky-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez, and then you still have Jeremy McNichols. I have him projected for about 4 carries. So it's enough to where he's annoying as a number 3 guy. And then it's certainly annoying between the 2 leaders in the committee where they're pretty much splitting it evenly. So I hope that eventually one of these guys emerges so that we can feel more confidence in starting him in guillotine leagues. But until that happens, and then especially until Jaden Daniels, like we know he's coming back. Mariota was fine last week, but the offense obviously functions at another level. And I do think that Mariota, out of the 2 quarterbacks, he might be a little likelier than Jaden Daniels to take a goal line carry. And so there's even a little more kind of built-in downside for some of these running backs in that the offense is better with Daniels there and he's less likely to vulture a touchdown. So until we get Jaden Daniels back, I'm probably hands off with the entire backfield.
Yeah, the Washington is also expected to be without both starting wide receivers in this game, and that's not good for any part of the offense. I know there's a lot of people who like to play that game like, oh, it means they're going to run more. Like, there's nothing good that comes out of losing your number 1 and number 2 or number 1 and number 3 wide receivers. So I don't think that's ultimately going to help the Washington running back situation either. In a second, we're going to get to our final stanza of Flex Around and Find Out players. But first, today's show is built entirely around performances that did not live up to our expectations or may not live up to our expectations, but now with Xfinity. Introducing the 5-year price guarantee from Xfinity. 1 internet price, 5 years guaranteed. Life is unpredictable, but the price of your internet should not be unpredictable. Get a reliable price and a reliable connection. When Xfinity says all in, they mean all in. You get all the Wi-Fi equipment. You get unlimited data included as well. Guillotine Leagues are all about change, roster upheaval, constant improvement. But no matter what changes in 5 years, the price of your internet will stay the same. Learn more at Xfinity.com. Restrictions apply. New residential customers only. Taxes and fees extra and subject to change. All right, gang, let's go to our last third of Flex Around and Find Out players. Freedman, you've got a tight end who's been overperforming to this point. Talk to us about Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah, let me present some context. Let me explore the context for this game. So,
all right, I like it.
It's the 2nd straight home game for the Bills and their 3rd home game in 4 weeks. They have 3 extra days of rest and prep coming off of Thursday Night Football. They are an outdoor Northeast team, like upstate New York team, hosting an indoor team from the South. Like all of that just screams like smash spot for this offense. And then you look at the team they're going against, the Saints. They're playing their second straight road game, and they're going coast to coast after playing in Seattle last week. And then, it's the Saints, who have the league's worst record at 0-3. If they're not the worst team in the league, they're comfortably bottom 3. The Bills are consensus 15.5 point favorites. And frankly, I think that's giving the Saints too much credit if I'm like looking at the stuff that goes into the Fantasy Life game model. So all of this leads to the question, how many pass attempts is Josh Allen going to have in this game? Last week in a 31-21 win over the Dolphins, he had 28 attempts. The week before that, a 30-10 win over the Jets, he had just 25 pass attempts. So I think that's like the vicinity that we are in. That's the range that we could probably expect. Honestly, maybe even fewer pass attempts. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of action via the passing game for the Bills. And then we look at Dalton Kincaid. The utilization report, he has a 61% route rate when I'm looking at that tool we have at Fantasy Life, a 17% target share. Like, that's not great. He has a 73 utilization score. That's decent, but a lot of that is because he has a position best 38% share of end zone targets. But that can be really fickle, and that's just based on 3 games of data, right? Like, that could dry up. And if he doesn't score, he's going to be in trouble because he's not a target hog. Like, he has a good chance of getting 4 to 6 targets in a game. And like, that's a nice little floor, but that doesn't have a high ceiling with it. Like, think about what we saw this past week out of Oronde Gadsden, a day 3 rookie for the Chargers. In his first NFL game last week, he had 7 targets. Like, Kincaid, he hasn't hit 7 targets yet this year. Like, he hasn't proven himself to be a consistent target earner yet. For his career, he has an average of 7 yards per target, but this year he's averaging an elite 9.4. At some point, regression is going to hit. So he's just not consistent enough with his usage for me to feel comfortable with him. He's in a good offense, good situation, so he could score a touchdown, but he also has a very clear path to something like 2 receptions for 18 yards. Like, that is very much within the realm of outcomes. So I know it's tough to look at what he's done this year as like a top fantasy scorer at the position and say, oh, he's got this smash matchup going against a totally overrated defense. I'm starting him, but like, there is real downside to starting Dalton Kincaid this week.
All right, Thor. Speaking of tools at Fantasy Life, we turn to you and your flex around and find out player. I love this contrarian take. Talk to me about Las Vegas wide receiver Trey Tucker.
Yeah, I'm fading Trey Tucker after his ridiculous game last week. 8 catches, 145 yards, 3 touchdowns against the Commanders, 40.9 fantasy points. And after that game, I believe he's a top 5 fantasy receiver in overall points. He
could be after that.
Yeah, you add that in. A bit of a fluky game. I think it would be fair to say a lot of that production was accrued in the fourth quarter, which began with a score of Washington 34, Las Vegas 10. So then you get a little bit more YOLO. Tucker ends up scoring 2 of his touchdowns in the fourth quarter, including 60-plus yarder, accruing a lot of those stats. He's going to go back to his usage prior to that and prior season, but also in week 1 and 2. And just speaking to the week 1 and 2 usage, 0.85 yards per route run, 14% target share. Then you look in, so I expect that more or less to be the usage in this game, around that 14-15% target share. And then this matchup itself, Chicago likes to play a lot of too high safety coverage looks. They're top 3 in the NFL in the rate that they use that coverage. That seeks to take away the explosive plays that Trey Tucker builds his fantasy resume on in the games that he's startable. So I just don't think that this is a good matchup. He's going to revert back to the previous usage, like I said, and a sneaky bad matchup for a guy like Trey Tucker. I'd keep him on the bench this week.
Freedman, this is I can't go where Thor's going with this right now with this battered Bears defense. But talk to me. What do you think? You can perhaps be the tiebreaker here. Trey Tucker, startable in the guillotine styles of play.
He's super volatile. I will say I like the matchup. And I think Geno Smith has a really good performance. I like Jacoby Myers. Trey Tucker, he's a ceiling play. We obviously saw that last week, but man, the floor is 2 targets for 0 receptions. Like that is also a real possibility. So I think it would be, kind of mentally hard not to start him after you probably didn't start him last week and you saw 40 points on your bench. But man, there's a reason why he was on your bench last week. If he wasn't good enough last week to be in your starting lineup, like you don't just automatically lock him in this week. So I can definitely see the case that Thor is making.
Yeah, there's certainly risk here. And if it were a different defense, I would probably feel differently. Just, no Jalen Johnson is such a big loss. No Kyler Gordon in the slot. That's a big loss. Jacoby Myers is potentially sitting on a gigantic game. I'm glad you brought his name up. Yeah. That could be the best angle here overall. Okay, our 9th and final flex around and find out player is New England wide receiver Stefon Diggs as he goes up against Carolina. I'm going to give you some Carolina stats, guys, but we're going to put an asterisk on the end of this just because the Panthers haven't played any really good passing offenses yet. They've played Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, and Michael Penix. So, this is not necessarily accurate, but in fairness, they've also held those 3 mediocre passers to worse than normal games. By the way, consider Drake May for this spot as well, but I'm going with Stefon Diggs as a side note, just because we were talking about Lawrence, Murray, and Penix. May worries me a little bit in this spot too. That no matter what, Carolina's secondary is way better than it was last year, though. Get this, no opposing wideout has topped 55 yards. I mean, 55 yards is nothing in today's day and age. That's it. Only one opposing wideout against Carolina has scored. Carolina's 2 boundary cornerbacks, Mike Jackson and J.C. Horn, are pretty darn good. Horn might be one of the better young emerging cornerbacks in the league. Now, their slot cornerback is a guy named Chow Smith-Wade. He's just a guy. That's not important. But that doesn't really affect Stefon Diggs because he doesn't run from the slot that much. That's Pop Douglas who runs from the slot. The real killer for Diggs, in addition to a potentially tricky matchup, he's just not getting any volume. And it's a little bit weird. He's averaging 4 targets per game, and Diggs has not been targeted in the red zone yet. So, for an offense that doesn't have a ton of passing offense, that doesn't have a ton of weapons, you would think Stefon Diggs would be getting a lot of volume. Has not materialized yet. I don't know that it's going to materialize here. Again, Thor and Freedman, I'm not suggesting Carolina is this superimposing defense you can't get anything done against. I am saying they're much improved, and they're not the layup that perhaps you thought they were.
100%. Yeah, and I think in the passing game, you're looking to paper cut the Panthers, to your point there. Most of the targets for the Patriots passing game to this point have come to Hunter Henry because he's been the most reliable in terms of getting just a little bit of separation beats after the snap. But you're going to attack the slot here. And maybe Pop Douglas can average more than 2 yards of reception in this game.
That would be nice. Yeah, we would take that. Freedman, you starting Stefon Diggs?
No, to your point, the Panthers number 4 in defensive dropback EPA this year. Some of that is because of the matchups, but they're also just stouter in the secondary. They've improved year over year there. And the big thing is that Stefon Diggs, he's just a rotational receiver in how he's being used. And if that's the case, no, you can't put him in the lineup.
I'm afraid not for Stefon Diggs. There you go. 9 flex around to find out players. I want to tell you guys about my find of the week. What I think it was that I found on 2 different Guillotine League waivers. Tajay Spears. So, he's getting cut, but because he has no stats, he's not showing up at the top of your list of free agents, right? Because he's all zeros. But he's eligible to come off IR in 2 weeks. And you've got at least a plausible running back. He will cost you $0. You can go pick up Tajay Spears in many leagues right now. What do you think about that as a sneaky stash with 15 teams left?
I like that. Maybe you can sabotage cut Pacheco to facilitate it.
Yeah, that's right. That's the guy we can let go.
We call that the double charge right there.
I love it.
Yeah, that's great. Love that.
All right. Thank you, guys. This has been a ton of fun. Best of luck for the weekend, everybody. 9 players that you may not want to start. We hope you found this helpful. We'll be back next Tuesday with Brian Johnson to talk through all the waiver advice you need next week as well. Thanks for watching, everybody.